Hello and welcome. This is edition 8 of Chat with Chet. I'm Chet. Thank you for joining us today. It's a lovely day outside. The birds have been chirping. I haven't seen turkeys today, but I'm sure they're somewhere around the corner. I hope that you're all doing well today. So today's chat is going to be on transitions inside Disguise. And one methodology, which is brand new as of 17.1, which I won't be going into, you can check out down in the comments. I linked to a short talk that Rich Porter gave on it yesterday. So go give Rich a look and also check out the rest of his videos because he's doing some really great work as well. So this came out of our recent talks on Watch Out. I demonstrated a quick way to do something similar to how I do in Watch Out. And then I thought to myself and wondered, there's a lot of different ways to approach this. So why don't I just go through a myriad of ways of transitioning from one video to another that's not just a straight cross dissolve, which we're all so used to working in. So with that being said, I'm going to pop over to Manager, and we're going to take a dive in. So you can see here, this is my D3 Manager, just like we're used to. There's actually a new option up here called Machine Settings, which allows us to enable application mode, which is not something I'm going to go into today, but is a really interesting addition as of about an hour ago by Disguise, so that we can use a windowed version of D3 and actually resize said window. It's a little less performant, and my poor Surface Book is trying its hardest right now, so we're going to avoid that for today. We're just going to pop into today's Chat with Chet. So here we have our standard D3 look. I'm going to go ahead and we'll just pull the projector off the stage since we don't really need it for today. And let's see. For some reason, I can no longer grab Puck and move him. I'm sure I'm just missing something, but great. Bare stage. So let's dive into transitions with a review of what we did before. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a video on stage. And for that video, let's just go ahead and let's work with Ada for a second. So if I want to make Ada fade in, it's easy enough to just do it through our opacity. 5-second fade in. Easy. We all know how to do this. Honestly, it's a little bit boring. So let's go ahead and let's look at a different way of doing this. I'm going to make a bitmap layer. And for the media I'm going to choose, we'll go ahead and use the circle mask transparent, just like we did previously. We'll set its blend mode to be mask blend mode, and move it to the bottom here. And all we're going to do is scale the size from all the way down over 5 seconds until we reveal the whole image. So now if we watch that, we get a nice slow reveal. So the mask blend mode is a little bit special in D3 because it works rather than top bottom. The mask blend mode blends what's on top of it, which is a little tricky to think about. And there's also some interesting ramifications for it when it comes to working with blacks versus alphas. But let's go ahead and let's demonstrate how that works with another video. This time we will go ahead and use our friend George. George, we don't see him. Why don't we see George? Well, that's because he's above the mask. So if you just grab his layer and move it to the bottom, Perfect. So now let's run the fade in. Ooh, what's this? Notice this kind of grain around the edges? That's because our alpha hasn't been pre-multiplied. So if we come back over to here and we set our blend mode to be pre-mult alpha instead of multiply alpha, now we get a nice smooth edge on the end. Mind you, we're still using the massively small texture from the bitmap layer, which isn't doing us much good as far as not getting pixelation around the edges. If I was to do this, I would probably decide to do it manually and create my own larger circle based on that. So let's go ahead and let's just play that again so we watch it go out. And now we have a nice iris reveal from the center. We can adjust the location of this bitmap layer. And let's watch it move as we bring it down. So if we pop into this position Y, and I'm going to hold the control key while I'm doing this, which lets me adjust the previous keyframe rather than right where my playhead is. So now, as I rotate up, you see a negative position moves it up, positive position moves it down. So let's try from, say, right here. Now this time, we have an iris reveal from the bottom. And note how we're not quite finishing the edges, so all we're going to do is come back here into the size, hold control again to grab that, and roll it up until we see no George. As you can see, fairly simple. The first method we're going to discuss on how to do this. One other interesting piece that we can do here is I'm just going to go ahead and delete my bitmap layer and pop it back in to show something that I do a lot, which is put this into mask mode again. And then for our bitmap texture, we're actually going to make a new one. A soft edge texture, which is going to allow me to draw the location of the soft edge. And it's going to let me basically carve out if I want to do an interesting approach to composition here. But you may notice as we're doing this, oh, but we've got black in the back. Well, if we change it from alpha mode color gradient to an alpha gradient, now we can see through and we can start to compose those on top of one another. This may never be useful to you. I used it very heavily in a show that I did this summer and then again in the winter to basically carve the backdrop that we're working with so that we create interesting looks with the same video and then slowly fade them between one another using the transition time on the layer. So if we set it to be a transition time of, say, 4 seconds, put a section break here, and switch out our bitmap, we'll crossfade between those textures as we pop between sections. And you'll notice some scaling going on as we go back and forth because we have different aspect ratios between the two. So when we do something like this, we want to make sure that we have a unified aspect ratio. Usually I'll actually build that soft edge texture if we come back here. It defaults to 1024 by 768. Usually I'll build it to the resolution of whatever the screen I'm working with is. But that's one way to deal with all of this, is using that bitmap layer to bring a bitmap in. Let's look at a different way of doing a wipe reveal now. If I want to reveal Ada, say with a left to right crop in it, we're going to use that crop. And what we'll do is we'll basically take the right. So we're going to go from 0 to 5 seconds, crop reveal, and let's just play that so we see it. This is showing us two things we have to be careful of. First of all, notice this S-curve. So we have a very slow start, and then we accelerate, and then we gradually knock back down. We may not want that, so we're going to go ahead and set this to be a linear keyframe, so it's a smooth transition all the way across. The other thing I don't really like is, look at this edge. This edge is ugly. So let's go ahead and let's add a vignette down here under the crop to give us a little bit more to work with. So I'm vignetting it. And you'll notice, ew, we've got this weird cropping happening on the side. And what we're going to do to avoid that is actually take all of these, which we can't currently right now, take it to -1 for the minimum on all of these. To access this field, basically any of my selection boxes here, I can right click and be able to set min max for them. I can also set a step, so when I'm clicked into it, when I rotate my scroll wheel, that will change what I'm working with. And I can also give it a damping ability. I suggest strongly not using the damping because I've seen a lot of people back themselves into a corner with it. Damping smooths out as we move from one keyframe to another, but it makes it harder to accurately time when your keyframes are going to come. So what I'll see very frequently is someone will roll the damping up not thinking about it, and then they'll complain because they can't get to the full opacity. They'll hit there and it hasn't landed yet. So be careful with the damping. It's mainly designed if you're going to use a MIDI controller to control the fade ins, fade outs, or the color effects, so you have a little bit more smoothness to it. Cool, so we've made these so that they can go to -1, and now we're just going to take them all the way out to -1. And let's adjust this vignette as well so that we can take it to a -1. And set our alpha back to straight alpha. So now if we watch this, you can see that vignette's still a little bit too much. So we're just going to come back in. Vignette it back. So yeah, Premult alpha in this case actually does us a major disservice because what's going to do is multiply the alpha here so that we get a really bad brightness shift. But now we have a nice smooth movement across. Easy like that. So another way that we could approach this, oh, we're seeing a little bit of George there though, so to fix that, we'll just make sure that our crop actually goes to -1 and rotate that crop out till he's gone. So another way that we can use this is that. What if you want to do this with an actual layer that you control? Well, we can do that using a gradient module. A gradient module is going to allow us to create a linear or a radial gradient dynamically. And so one thing I will do commonly, which let's just go ahead and mute George so that we don't have to see him while we're doing this, is use this as a wipe reveal to what's below it. So first thing we're going to do is adjust this length down so that we have a much tighter here. And then we'll go ahead and we'll drop this all the way out. And over 5 seconds, bring that in. And let's also go ahead and undo this crop work that we had been done so we can use this as a reveal. So now if we switch this from blend mode alpha to blend mode multiply fade, as that comes down, this appears. Thank you for tuning in to Chat with Chet, Sean Hooper. It's good to see you digitally, and I'm glad you're crossing things off your list. So why would we want to do this as a layer rather than do it like we demonstrated before on the actual video layer itself? One thing I will often do with these gradients is then tie that length of it, the position Y here, to automation, so that as a screen comes in, it wipe reveals either on or off to that screen. And so that can be a very helpful aspect. No, welcome to us. You're not too late at all. We're just going through a bunch of different means of how we can do various transition pieces. So that's why I like having this position Y on a gradient layer, because I can put that gradient layer across the entire timeline, or even throw it into a separate track itself that lives on top of everything and will just fade in and fade out, so I don't have to think about it. So just another approach to it. One thing that's interesting is if we set this to be a mask layer or a mask blend mode, and then put it back down below, we're not going to see any, oh, it does reveal it just like we wanted to, but if we unmute George, oh, it works out perfectly. I was having issues with this morning for some reason and had to switch it to a black and white gradient. But there we go. Another approach to it using the mask layer rather than the multiply fade. Multiply fade is great for going on top of everything because it will affect everything below it. So if I move this gradient to the top and set it to be a multiply fade, it affects everything below it. So that's why I like the mask for a reveal, is because it lets us blend out and get there. And again, we'll just run that so we see. Now we revealed George and Lita. You can see there's a little bit of George sticking up because we didn't run the crop on the right out far enough to cover all of George. So, handful of ways of doing that using the gradient layer, using some built-in pieces on it, using the mask blend mode, using the multiply fade blend mode. Now we're going to look at two different layers that will also help us accomplish the same thing in a more kind of advanced way. The last one we'll cover is actually my favorite. So let's do the channel routing layer. I'm going to go ahead and reorganize these as I like them. Channel router. So what's the channel router layer good for? Let's go ahead and start by piping just Lita into this. And we're going to swap out Lita with color bars to get a more interesting aspect of what's going on. Channel router lets us deal with something where the RGB components are not listed in RGB. So for instance, if this is going to be a BGR, I can swap our component to be source 1 green and the B component to be source 1 red. And you can see this does not look right, but if your video is encoded in that way, we can work our way around it. I've never used it for that, but it's kind of a get out of jail free card. Oh, you were supposed to be blue, not green. That looks a little bit better. It's still an inversion of the colors. But let's go ahead and let's put this back to be what it's supposed to be. But the other thing the channel router can do is allow us to replace the alpha component. So we can arrow a second layer in. In this case, we'll layer the gradient layer. And we'll set the alpha component to be source 1 or source 2, either alpha or luma. So currently it's set to luma, and that's not going to do us anything. Let's set it instead to alpha. And now we get exactly what we were anticipating. And that is a different way of approaching this gradient. Now notice that lets us do the gradient reveal on top of George. And that's why this is exciting and useful, is because we can replace either that alpha or that luma to be able to create our own transitions. Gradient layer works fine for that. Let's do this with a video layer instead. So I'm also going to clean this up because this looks like crap and I can't tell what's going on. So we're going to rename video 2 to be base layer George I'm pretty sure I spelled George wrong there, but I actually am not sure. Did you ever look at a word for too long and then just forget what it is? And so we're going to rename this to be reveal layer Lida. Swap it back to Lida, or Ada, sorry. I keep combining Lena and Ada and creating a person that is fictional. And then we're going to make one more video layer. I'll put it down here just for good organization. And this will be revealing call that video reveal, and we'll just call this Lida instead. So I've got some transition movies saved in here. Bubbles, the sand, this black ink transition. These are the three that we're going to work with to start out with this. So let's start with this left to right transition. Right, like that. This is the video that we're going to play. So I'm going to pipe it into the channel router and change this from source to alpha to source to luma. So now when we play that video, we get that nice reveal. And for those who know what they're doing in D3 and are yelling at me for something I did wrong, I wanted to demonstrate this. I believe it's all part of the plan. Let's just watch this for a second. We reveal Ada. Oh no. We reveal Ada again. The default for all video layers is to loop at the endpoint. So we'll go ahead and we'll set that loop to be a pause instead. So now we get a nice reveal of Ada. And no matter how long this runs, we don't reveal her again. So let's pause here where we can see that video and see what it's doing. And let's adjust a couple things in this channel router layer, or in this video reveal layer. Down here under color shift, we can swap the red min and the red max. So let's do that. 1. And the max we will set back to be 0. So we just swapped the red channel so that the maximum red channel is now 0, the minimum is 1. We inverted the color of the image. So we can watch it play if we leave this open and go. So you can see now it's reveal. Or sorry, it's a fade out rather than a fade in. Just something useful to keep in mind as we have this means to adjust it in that regard. I like that. It gives us a more interesting look. Mind you, there are some weird quirks to it. You have to think about that as we go into our programming. You do have the ability, and let's swap these back to be 0 and swap this back to be 1. So again, we have the reveal. Well, if we want to change that direction, well, that's easy enough to do. If we want to reverse it, we'll come over here to our move and scale our Y to be, rather than 1, -1. So now we reveal, oh, I should do that on the X, not the Y, because that just flipped the video upside down. Scale X to -1, and it comes from the other direction this time. We could even go as far as to rotate it 90 degrees. And note how it's not filling. Then it's a matter of just scaling the Y. Or sorry, scaling the, yes, it should be the Y scale. Yeah, the Y scale on the video reveal till it covers that whole range. But look at how those circles are. This is obviously not designed to go that direction. So use at your own caution. Just an interesting example of how we can do these. So it's a channel router. We've got multiple videos piped into the channel router. Maybe we'll find that useful. But let's switch over to my favorite. I'm going to go ahead and delete the channel router because we don't need it. And also delete the video reveal because we don't need it. And now we're going to use the video transition layer. So the video transition layer is basically going to use a white video to reveal the two videos piped into it. You'll use this if you want to do something like, oh, hey, I want to checkerboard this, where every other box is are two different images. You could then make a video that is that checkerboard and look at it that way. I say video. The video transition layer requires a video to make it work. So let's start by alt-dragging Ada into our video transition layer. And now under media, we have to select something. So let's choose our sands of time this time. And so now when we play it, same thing is happening. We reveal Ada using that. And again, danger video transition, set to loop by default. Let's set it to pause. Reveal. We can slow down the speed if we want to make this happen a little bit slower. So we'll make it 0.5 seconds, which you get a little bit of frame stuttering, but not bad. So this accomplishes the same thing. We could even pipe George into it if we wanted to, which isn't going to do us much good because that's essentially what we're doing. When we have none of source 2 on, it's all the black source from the video. So not anything terribly exciting there, but interesting. But the big thing that video transition lets us do is let's actually swap this video. I don't care about play speed anymore. I've got some still images to work with. So like this wipe that we're going to use. And you'll notice that we're already seeing it work. This is the bias. The bias lets us adjust how heavy we are to one side or to the other. So in this case, we'll go from a bias. Usually it's like a 0.9 or so, maybe a little bit lower. Let's see, as we roll down, start to notice her there. Yeah, so 0.92 seems good. And over 5 seconds, we'll just reveal that. And so this is something I made years ago, which is actually not great for this, and we'll see it as we play, because it's a very hard gradient. But now we have kind of this gradient reveal of eta. A little bit smoother because it's a much longer gradient than when we did it with the gradient layer. Its time is being controlled by this bias. There's also the mix hardness, which we can use to adjust how heavy we are between the two. So if we want it to be a little bit tighter, we can roll this mix bias up and get an interesting look across here. We could swap that out with this radial bottom that I have as well and see a similar thing. And you'll notice right around, see how there's kind of this second wave of the gradient? That's because I made a very quick, not great gradient when I did this for the first demonstrations I used it in. And again, if we come back here to the mix hardness, we can make it really tight between them or open it up. Why do I prefer this over using the channel router? The channel router couldn't take this because this is actually only, throw another video layer to demonstrate it. This is a one-frame hat movie to build this gradient. It's not a moving image. We control that through the bias, which means that we can do a much longer fade than we could before. Let's mute this and take this bias rather than 5 seconds to be 15 seconds. And just watch how that plays out. So you see it takes a little bit before it starts. But we can slow that down easier than we could the other way. And again, that mix hardness is a little bit weird, so we'll probably want to come in here to the video transition, take this mix hardness down so it's a little bit smoother, and watch that play out. So it lets us do a much slower gradual reveal, which for my money is a more interesting look. You can also get really artistic with it, which is one of my favorite features. So let's go ahead, let's put this back up and show. I made this yesterday working with a radial gradient. We've got these weird kind of smoky effects. I basically drag so that we don't just have smooth white to black on the edges. Instead, there's more interesting gray throughout the course of it. So now if I use this in place of the video in the radial, in the video transition layer, just delete this. We get a really kind of interesting smoky effect around the edges. See how George's face is disappearing into those smoke? And I'm going to go ahead and make this just a little bit faster so that we get a better view of that. I'm going to knock it down to like an 8-second fade. So about half the time. So yeah, we get kind of those nice, interesting tendrils as we're coming across. And this was something I made in about half an hour. I'd spend more time playing with it if I was going to use it in a show. But that gives a more interesting morph, and we have more control over its speed rather than just trying to slow down the video we're playing. And that's why I really like the video transition layer, is that ability to take a one-frame image and really kind of create something interesting to ooze between looks. You'll also notice that we're coming down this way. I don't really like that. So what we're going to do is come into the video transition layer. And again, under that color shift, oh, we looked at this before. We'll swap that to be 1 to 0 instead. And now we have the grow out. Which is just, I find, a more fascinating way to look at it. It gives me a little bit more flexibility. And so what I'd probably do is just export a video transition layer, or really a video transition layer and a dummy layer here in a group. Let's demonstrate that. I kind of like how this looks. I'll build more transitions that way. I'll go ahead and I'll group them. And then we'll save as the video transition template. And now that means anytime I want to use this, I can come in, import layer, video transition template, and get it right like that. Ooh. They broke import copy again. That's good to know. I have another email to send to D3. I'm using 17.2, which just came out about 20 minutes ago. Not 20 minutes ago, 3 hours ago. So you can see when I import that copy, it actually breaks the arrow connection between the layers. Because we shouldn't see Ada yet. She should be revealed. So if I remake the connection, now we get that reveal. And this gives us a really interesting feel of like that milkiness that we get in this transition, which slowly gets faded out. And there we have it. Kind of a dive into the various transition methods inside D3 and some interesting layers that we can use to create a new effect. So, how did that go for everyone? Does that make sense? I'm a really big fan of playing with these various methods and getting a chance to adjust them, see what they're doing. It's kind of how I like to think of myself as an artist. I like smooth, kind of blending between things rather than just a simple dissolve between them. So are there any questions that have come up along this? I know I covered kind of a lot just bouncing around. But I'm here to answer anything that you guys may have thought of while we were going through this whole process. I've also been leaning over this keyboard for hours and needed to stretch. I need to figure out a way to keep my coffee warm while I'm doing these so that I don't have lukewarm coffee at the end that I'm sipping. I think the natural solution is pull a Dave and buy a Bluetooth cup that will just keep it warm, but I'm not sure I'm quite ready for that bridge. It's a tempting idea, though. All right. Well, thank you all very much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure, as always, and we'll be back again next week with another edition of Chat with Chet. Still kind of thinking about ideas. I may sit down and finally get enough done to do a workflow of here is a prepped Vectorworks show. Let me bounce these out into Blender, do the UV unwrapping, clean up the models, bring those models into D3. I'm not sure if I can get that quite ready for next week, but that's one coming up. There have also been requests for a Watch Out introduction class and a couple others. So I've got some ideas I'm playing with. And of course, definitely want to have some guests on at some point, get other people's perspective about using software, and really just have a nice conversation. So anyway, it's been a pleasure, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and I'll see you next time.